friends, welcome back to Julia at Home. Today's video is about composer study. If you're new here, welcome. I'm a homeschool mom of 4, ranging in age from 2 all the way up to 11. I am Montessori inspired for the younger years and Charlotte Mason inspired for the older years, starting around 1st grade. And composer study happens to be a Charlotte Mason subject. Let's start with what is composer study? The simple answer is that composer study is just listening to pieces of music by one composer over the period of several weeks. And it can range anywhere from like 1 week to Charlotte Mason usually has one for 12 weeks. It can be done over a variety of ages. I believe Charlotte Mason started this with her earliest forms at age 6 and what we would call 1st grade here in the US. But I've also incorporated my preschoolers into this, and I have been doing this with my children since my oldest was in preschool. You, as the parent or teacher, do not need to have any experience with music to do this. You can learn right along with your children. And I do have some resources that I'm going to come to that can help you out with that as well. And while most of the composers that we have studied and that are suggested are more classical and a little bit older, they don't have to be. We have studied the Beatles, for example, and listened to a bunch of their songs and learned about them. So yeah, doesn't have to be classical, doesn't have to be one person, can be a group, can be more modern, can be a living person today. I have been thinking of doing a Taylor Swift composer study, to be honest. We will probably do that at some point, just as long as they're a composer. So that's the only requirement. Before we get into the details of how I do composer study, I do want to talk about why we do composer study. And there are probably a myriad of reasons that I'm not thinking about. So if you think of others that you want to add, feel free to comment below. I'm just going to talk about why I decided to do it and why I keep doing it with my kids. The first thing is I just think it adds beauty. I think music adds so much richness to our lives. It can help change and transform the atmosphere and mood of a place. And so I often have music just playing in the background. I find it really does affect my mood personally. And I love lots of different genres of music. So I just do it for the beauty factor. But also I think that listening to music does help, elevate, make connections in your brain. And I know there's been studies on how playing music, how learning an instrument can make different brain connections. And I'm sure just listening doesn't do as much, but with composer study, we are actively listening to the music. And so we're learning about music. And I do think it is making some of those it's doing a little bit of something extra up there in my belief. I don't necessarily have studies to back that up, but that's my belief. And you know what? It's one of those things that can't hurt. Okay, let's get into the details of how we do composer study in our homeschool. I'm going to be talking about Bach because that is the composer we are doing right now. So the resources I will share with you and how I'm explaining this will be about Bach. So we're going to be studying Bach for 4 to 6 weeks. We're kind of going to see how it goes. Mainly that's because some weeks we don't get to as many lessons as I would like to. So if we can do, 2 a week for 4 weeks, that would be perfect. But as it is, we've already missed 1 or 2. So it's probably going to be closer to 5 or 6 weeks. I have chosen songs for each of the lessons that we will listen to. We will be listening for certain elements in the piece. So we will be listening for the instrumentation, which is what instruments or, vocals count as an instrument. What instruments do you hear in the piece? We will be listening for the dynamics, which are how quiet or loud is it, and how does it shift between quiet and loud? So some songs you have that are just loud, some might just be quiet. Most of them change throughout, and so you want your kids to be able to recognize, oh, they just got really loud right there, but now they're getting really quiet again. So those are dynamics. The tempo is generally how fast it's going. This is separate from rhythm. It's just the general pace of the piece. So I'm trying to think of some examples. I don't know if I can think of ones that all of you might know. If you think about it, if you're like at a high school or middle school dance, the songs that you would slow dance to are probably at a slower tempo, whereas the songs that people are like jumping are probably at a higher tempo. So hopefully that makes sense. That's what tempo is how fast or slow the song is. Then we have, we talked about instrumentation, dynamics, tempo. Rhythm is a little bit different than tempo. So tempo is how fast the overall piece is, and a lot of the pieces, especially classically, are andante, which is like a walking pace, if you will. And you can discuss these terms with your kids. I'm going to link here. I have a separate video just learning some musical things that we did a while ago. And so I will link that here. So you can have a little bit more of an entry to some of what I'm saying. But I have resources that I'm going to share with you. So if you don't know the terms I'm talking about, just go see some of those resources or just look them up. And that will help you out. I'm not going to explain them all in this video. Okay, but we talked about tempo. So rhythm is, it's a little bit harder to explain. So like if you've ever played the drums or like rhythm stuff is like the ta, ta, ti, ti, ta. Like that would be a rhythm that's different than like ta, 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 or ti, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta. Those are all different rhythms. And so you just kind of want, it's harder for kids to describe usually, but sometimes they can draw it out or dance it. And I'll come back to that in a second too. But okay, so we've talked, but let's make sure we're covering all the elements. We've got instrumentation, dynamics, rhythm, and tempo. And I feel like, mood is the last one. And this I feel like is the most subjective. It's like, how does this make you feel? And a lot of times there's like a general mood to the piece that we can all agree on most of the time. But sometimes you'll have a piece where you got like one kid out of left field that's like, this song makes me angry. And it's like, I didn't get that at all. Like, where are you getting angry from this? But no answer is wrong when it comes to mood. So we're just kind of trying to think and feel about how the piece makes us feel. So those are, I believe, 5, right? I believe I said 5 different elements that I listen for with my kids. And we'll listen to some of the piece and we'll talk about it as we're listening. And the pieces we're listening to are not long pieces. They're usually like 2 to 5 minutes. So a lot of classical composers obviously have longer pieces, and so usually it's like a piece of them. For example, that happens to be right next to me, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, which is a really popular piece by Bach, is part of a longer cantata, but we just listened to that section of it, which is the Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring part. That is pretty famous. We almost always keep it really simple and just talk about the things we're listening to as far as the elements we were talking about in the piece. But there are variations you can do. So you can have the children dance it out. I feel like this works really well for young children. My 4-year-old loves to dance to the pieces that we're listening to. You can also have them draw something out. You could have them write a story or a poem based on the piece. We did do a poem for Vivaldi. I can't remember if he wrote them or if somebody else wrote them. But his 4 seasons, there are poems out there for different seasons. And so we read one of them and then I had my kids write one based on one of the seasons. So that's another option. But that's completely not necessary. And I almost never do something extra in that way for this topic because I just want to keep it simple. In addition to listening, we are also learning about the life of the composer. Most of the time they're already deceased, but we can still learn about people who are living today as well. A lot of the classical ones that you think of, Bach, Handel, Vivaldi, Mozart, things like that, there are at least one usually picture or children's book for them. And I even found, I think, 2 different picture books that I read to the kids about the Beatles. So there you go. I do have some resources to help you out. So, and again, some of these are very specific to Bach, but some of them are also general, and I'll start with those so that they can be helpful no matter what you want to do for composer study. So the first resource that I highly recommend is Squilt, which stands for Super Quiet Uninterrupted Listening Time. This is not sponsored, but I've used their products several times. They also have, I don't know if it's a subscription or exactly how it works, but basically an online community where they lead like a composer study type thing or music study. And I don't know if it's a different per thing every month or exactly how it works. I haven't personally done that. But if you just want somebody to do most of the work for you, that might be a really good option. You can go look at that. I'm going to have their website linked below. But I have used their products, and they're digital products. This is the Bach Composer Spotlight. They don't have a ton of composers. They have a few. And so they have Bach, and then they also have eras. So they'll have, I know they have like Baroque and Classical, where it's pieces by different composers of that era. And each of these, eras or composer spotlights have information on, I'm going to show you the contents a little bit here, on how it works, how to do it. So they have instructions for you. They have different notebooking and coloring pages and like copywork pages and stuff that you may or may not want to use depending on what you're doing in your homeschool. But most importantly, they have Oh, and they have detailed information on the different elements like dynamics, rhythm, tempo, and such. And so if you are new to this and you're not sure what's going on with those, this is a really good place to start. I've been using this for years and it's really helped me solidify. Even though I have had some musical background, I've learned instruments growing up and sang and stuff. So this has still been really, really helpful for me as far as teaching composer study. So I highly recommend even just getting one of these can help set you up, and then you might be able to do others on your own. But the other useful thing about this is it has lessons in it. So this one happens to have 3 different lessons. I believe the Eras one has more, like Baroque and classical. And it's a different piece to listen for each lesson. And for the piece, it has, let me see if I can show you one in here. I'm just taking out, I have this so I could give it to a child for copy work. I printed it out. Okay, here's lesson 1. It's Prelude and Fugue in C major. And it gives you information about the piece. And it also has, because this is a digital thing, you can follow digitally the links. And I generally just look them up myself, but this is really helpful. And so there's more notes, there's more or less notes on some of them. There's more notes on this here, and then it'll actually go through the different elements and have notes for you. So this is not something that I read aloud to my kid. Well, I might read the notes aloud to my kids. I kind of play by ear, but the different like elements, the dynamics, tempo, and everything, I read to myself, and then I may share some facts with my kids, but I don't want to influence them before they've listened to it. So I let them listen and share with me what their thoughts are on it. A lot of them, like, there's not really a wrong answer. So, I mean, there's certain instruments in there, you know, if it's like an a cappella piece and they're like, oh, I hear a flute and a trombone, then that's probably not right. But when you're talking about like mood and dynamics and tempo, there can be some wishy-washiness there. Like, is it allegro or andante, which is like, is it like kind of fast-ish, or is it like happy fast, or is it walking pace? I mean, it, you know, it could change. So yeah, so they have information on each of those. And then there's different other notes in here. So there's lots of good stuff. I find these really, really helpful. And again, like as a beginner composer study, I would start with one of these that they have so that you can use that as an outline and then go forward from there. The next resource is Music Study with the Masters from Simply Charlotte Mason. Now this is a little pricier, and it's because it involves a little bit more. This actually came with CDs. There are 2 CDs in the front, but one is in our CD player. And it has, you know, a bunch of information in here. I also occasionally use their picture study, the product they have for picture study. And so it comes in a similar, the writing's in a similar format. It tells you how to use it and what to do. There is a little biography of the person in here. I don't always use these. Simply Charlotte Mason is a Christian curriculum company, and I found that their biographies tend to have a Christian slant. Now, a lot of the people they're studying, they have like mostly the classical composers and artists were Christian, and so that makes sense. But some of it's just a little heavy on that for me. So I like to find other resources to use. Plus I find it's nice when there's a picture book, and so there's pictures and it's more engaging. So there are different things in here about him and a biography. There's also a list of books and things you can see for further study, and I do have some of these actually. And then, much like the Squilt resource, it does have different pieces in here that has just like notes on it. It doesn't go through the different elements that Squilt does. I think that's a unique to Squilt thing. But it does have notes on them. So for example, this has Concerto for 2 violins in D minor. And so it has like a little note on that for you. And all of these that are in here are on the CD. Now there are ones on the CDs that are not, there's not notes for, if that makes sense. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different pieces. Here's the table of contents that there are like notes for those pieces. And then there's a lot more tracks. It's on 2 CDs. Yeah, there's like 14 tracks on the first CD and 15 on the second. So, and on the back here, it does have a common Italian musical terms. And so that is helpful as well. So those are the two, like, kind of, I think, best resources specifically for composer study. And then I look for picture books. So I do want to share a couple things with you. Let me start with this. This is there is a series by Mike Venezia. Yeah, Mike Venezia. I think they're a little bit older, but they're really well done. And he has both artists and composers. And so I have quite a few of these because they're just, it's a nice comprehensive, like, collection of them. And so he'll include pictures in here that are, like, you know, this is like a portrait, and he'll source it. I think towards the back there's sources for those. But then he also does cartoons. So they're funny, and my kids like anything funny, right? And it's actually, like, I mean, it's pretty simple. You could have a child, an elementary age child, 3rd grade up, probably could read this to themselves, but I read it to them. And a book this length would usually take us, I think, two sittings, and I would have them narrate it back to me. I also have, there's a couple of different books like this, but this is Lives of the Musicians, Good Times, Bad Times, and What the Neighbors Thought. And so this is a collection of short stories about different musicians. Let's see. So this one happens, and I think there's like a second one too of this, and then there's other ones that are similar that have like short story collections. This one has Vivaldi, Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, because he was related to, and his son's other famous composers, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Verdi, Schumann, Foster, Brahms, and Tchaikovsky. And it has, here, this is Beethoven here, but it has pictures, and then, there's short stories. It's not a full book. So, like, this is a couple pages like this. So those are really easily integrated into your study, and this can be useful if you can't find something else. Like, maybe you could find something like a short story. So yeah, again, if I can think of other ones that I know that are like this, I will link them below so you can look at some options. And then for Bach specifically, I have Becoming Bach, which is a beautiful book, and it's just like a quick kind of very overview. It's an overview of his life. It's beautiful pictures and really designed for the younger set here. And then the last one I have for Bach is Bach's Goldberg Variations. And so this is just a picture book about him writing the Goldberg Variations. And this one's a little bit longer, and we haven't done this one yet, but we'll probably do it over several days, and I will try to match pieces of the Goldberg Variations with this book when we do it, for at least one of the lessons. So there we go. Those are my Bach resources. I almost forgot one of my favorite resources, and that is CDs. So there's two collections here, and this is the one that's really, really helpful for composer study. It's Classical Kids, and they have CDs based on different composers, and it's a story. So it's based on the composer's life, but it's a fictional story, usually involving a child. And they weave in the composer's music as part of the story and also just in the background of the story. So this is Mr. Bach Comes to Call. This is the Bach one. One of my favorites is Vivaldi's Ring of Mystery. And these are pretty old. Like, I remember listening to this one when I was a kid, and I loved it then. And I love it now for my children. So you may have to look for them used. I'm not sure how many are available now, but they are fantastic. We also have Tchaikovsky Discovers America, and Beethoven Lives Upstairs. And I think there's a few others that I just didn't currently have in we have this little CD basket, and I don't always have them all up at one time. And then the other series of CDs I want to show you are Maestro Classics. So these, they do have one on Handel called My Name is Handel, and we have that somewhere because we used it when we did Handel. But they more so have stories. So this is the Nutcracker. We love listening to this one around Christmas time. And this is Mike Mulligan and his Steam Shovel. We also have, and I'm not sure exactly where it is, we also have The Story of Swan Lake is a great one. When my oldest was a toddler, she was obsessed with Swan Lake. We would watch videos of it on YouTube. And so having the CD of that is great. And they're narrated stories over music. And we do have a CD player that we will pop in CDs and listen to things. And I also use, obviously, like my computer and phone to listen to things digitally. But then we also will listen to these in the car. I find it really useful if we're going to like piano lessons or on a field trip to pop in one of these. It actually makes the car ride a little calmer and more pleasant. I have a bunch of different resources for different composers because we've done quite a few over the years. And so I am trying to think of a good way to kind of compile that for you guys. So if you have any ideas, let me know in the comments below. I would love to work on that at some point for you all. So at the end of doing all this, right, however long we do it, 4, 5, 6 weeks, I will have my children do a narration about Bach's life. And my 5th grader will just write it or type it herself. And we're still at the point where I'm writing it out for my 3rd grader, but that's, I can go more into depth about narration in another video. But I'll have them do that. And I usually also ask them to talk about, you know, their favorite piece of music as part of the narration, just like like a sentence or two or more. But maybe they had a most favorite. If they, I don't usually ask them about least favorites, but if they're like vocal about really not liking something, then maybe that as well. But I'll usually ask, you know, what is your favorite and why? Or if they don't have a favorite, tell me about one you found interesting and why. There's different other questions you can ask, but I try to get them to talk about, you know, what we learned about the composer's life as well as the music to some extent. That's composer study. It's one of those things that is, you know, it's not one of the core subjects, but it really just adds a lot of beauty into our lives. Again, I love listening to music. I love learning about the composers as well. I just generally love learning alongside my children. So this is one of my favorite topics to learn about. As usual, if you have questions, please let me know in the comments below. And if you have a favorite composer, past or present, please also let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear who your favorites are. Wishing you all a happy, healthy, and safe November. Bye, friends.